He never wrote a single word down, not one sentence, not one letter, not a single page. Everything Jesus said was spoken. Everything he taught was memorized by people who heard him. And yet the Gospels record that wherever he went, the crowds were astonished, not just moved, not just inspired, astonished. Mark chapter 1 says the people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Luke chapter 2 records that at age 12, the teachers of the law in the Jerusalem temple were amazed at his understanding and his answers. At 12 years old, how does a boy from Nazareth, a village so obscure it does not appear in a single ancient document outside the Bible, become that? The answer is not miraculous. It is educational. First century Jewish education was one of the most rigorous systems in the ancient world, and Jesus went through every stage of it. Here is exactly what happened. Close your eyes. You are standing outside a small building in Nazareth. Stone walls, low ceiling, one open doorway. Inside, a group of boys are sitting on the floor in a semicircle around an older man. The man is reciting. The boys are repeating, word for word. In Hebrew, this is the Bet Sefer, the house of the book, the first school Jesus attended. In first century Galilee, every synagogue had a Bet Sefer attached to it. The school was part of the religious infrastructure of the community, as normal as the market or the well. Boys began at age 5, not 6, not 7, 5. The teacher was called the Sofer, the scribe. He was responsible for the education of every boy in the village between 5 and 10 years old. The entire curriculum was a single text, the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, not summaries of the Torah, not stories from the Torah, the actual text, word for word. The boys read it aloud. They recited it aloud. They wrote it on wax tablets and then recited it again. The goal was not understanding. The goal was memorization. A boy who completed the Bet Sefer by age 10 had the entire Torah stored in his memory. Every word from Genesis chapter 1 to Deuteronomy chapter 34. He could recite any passage on request. He could be given the first word of any verse and continue from there without hesitation. Now picture 5-year-old Jesus walking to that building every morning. The sound of a dozen voices reciting Hebrew in unison before the sun had fully risen. His sandals on the stone floor, his wax tablet under his arm. He sat where the other boys sat. He learned what the other boys learned. Joseph had been preparing him at home since age 3. The Talmud is explicit about the father's responsibility. A father must teach his son Torah. By the time Jesus arrived at the Bet Sefer, he was not starting from scratch. He was building on years of Joseph's teaching at the Friday table. Now here is what the Torah contained: the creation of the world, the covenant with Abraham, the exodus from Egypt, the law given at Sinai, 40 years in the desert, the promises of the prophets. Every parable Jesus would later tell is rooted in imagery from these 5 books. The father running toward the prodigal son, drawn from the covenant love of God in Deuteronomy. The sower scattering seed, drawn from the agricultural laws of Leviticus and the promises of Isaiah. The shepherd leaving 99 sheep to find the one lost, drawn from God's description of himself as shepherd in Ezekiel chapter 34. Every metaphor he reached for was already inside him, planted there by a sofer in a stone room in Nazareth when he was 5 years old. At age 10, the next stage began: Bet Talmud, the house of learning. Not every village had one. Nazareth almost certainly did not. This is where the record goes quiet. The Talmud records that only the most promising students, the ones the sofer identified as exceptional, moved on to this stage. The others went home at 10 and began their trade. Jesus' Bet Sefer teacher would have made a decision about him at age 10. Was he exceptional enough to continue? Luke chapter 2 tells us exactly what the answer was. Jesus, at age 12 in the temple, sitting among the teachers, asking questions, answering questions, astonishing everyone in earshot. He was not there by accident. He had been prepared. The Bet Talmud curriculum moved beyond memorization into interpretation. Not just what the Torah said, but what it meant. The students studied the Mishnah, the oral tradition, the accumulated commentary of generations of rabbis on every aspect of Jewish law. They studied Midrash, the method of interpreting scripture through questions, stories, and parallels. This is why Jesus taught the way he did. When a lawyer asked him which was the greatest commandment, he did not simply answer. He asked a question back. When the Pharisees challenged him on the Sabbath, he answered with a question. When a disciple asked him to explain a parable, he explained it by telling another story. This was not a personal quirk. This was the method. The exact teaching method of the rabbinic tradition he had been trained in since age 10. The Socratic question and answer structure, the story as argument, the scripture quoted to answer scripture. He had learned it. He had practiced it. He had mastered it so completely that by age 12 his teachers were astonished. Now at age 12 or shortly after, something happened that changed his education. Joseph died. The evidence from the Gospels is clear. Joseph is present at the temple scene when Jesus is 12. He is never mentioned again. By the time Jesus begins his ministry at 30, Joseph has been gone for years, which means the formal education almost certainly stopped. A boy who lost his father at 12 or 13 did not continue in school. He went home to work. He became the provider. He picked up his father's tools and walked to Sepphoris. But here is what most people miss. The education did not stop. It changed form. Jesus had the entire Torah in his memory. He had the Mishnah. He had the method. And now he had 18 years of silence, 18 years of working with his hands, watching the world, carrying stone and timber, listening to the men he worked alongside, the Galilean fishermen, farmers, tax collectors, and widows who would fill his parables. He was studying them, watching how they lived, how they suffered, how they prayed and fell short and got up again. This is where the education the school could never give him happened. Not in the stone room with the wax tablets, in the dust of the road to Sepphoris, at the table of a tax collector, in the house of a widow who could not pay her debt. Luke chapter 4 records the moment his formal education became public. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue as was his custom. He stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. He unrolled it and found the place. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He rolled up the scroll. He gave it back. He sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he said, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." The whole synagogue knew him. They had watched him grow up. They had heard him recite Torah at age 5 in the Bet Sefer. They knew his mother. They knew his brothers. And now they were fixed on him. Because what he just did, taking an Isaiah passage and saying it was fulfilled in his person today in this room, was not what a carpenter said. It was what a rabbi said. He had spent 30 years being educated, not only in the Bet Sefer, not only in the Bet Talmud, but in every room he had ever entered, every road he had ever walked, every widow he had ever watched make a meal from almost nothing. By the time he unrolled that scroll, the education was complete. And no one in the synagogue that day had any idea when it had happened. If this changed how you see the mind of Jesus, subscribe to Bible Radar. Tell me in the comments what hit you hardest: the 5-year-old with the wax tablet, the moment the teacher decided he was exceptional, or the 18 years of silence that finished what the school started. If you liked this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe for more.